Welcome back, friends. We have been analyzing how the civilization had come under pressure from these invasions coming from outside of Bharat-varsha and the disruption in the culture, the values, and the heritage of this great land. There was brave resistance, actually one of the most finest in the world of from any other societies. And in spite of that, there was a central region stronghold that they managed to gain. You were aware of the Arabic invasions which were repulsed, then the Turkish ones which were repulsed, then the Turco-Afghans with the Sultanate being established in Delhi roughly for about 300 plus years, and then the advent of the Mughals. We had examined by that time it was becoming apparent that they were becoming a political force. And before you can defend your heritage and your culture and your values, you have to defend your territory. Those were the battles that we touched upon last time of Haldi Ghati, followed by the Battle of Devaya of Rana Pratap and his son Amar Singh. 1606, the second battle of Devaya, where he fought Jahangir. Of course, Jahangir was then followed by Shah Jahan, and then it was a time for Aurangzeb, which is another low in terms of our civilizational position. Here, I will just share with you two stories. The first one is about the eldest son of Shah Jahan, that is Dara Shikoh. There's also a suburb, Shah Dara, in Delhi, in his memory. Dara Shikoh was the eldest son of Shah Jahan, his favorite, heir to the throne, much loved by the people because his temperament was very close to his Hindu subjects in terms of philosophy, ethics, and value systems. He had even translated a lot of scriptures, including the Upanishads, into Farsi. Shah Jahan's two other sons, Aurangzeb and Murad Baksh, very ambitious fellows. Aurangzeb was away on a campaign in the Deccan, and Murad Baksh was away in Gujarat to quell a rebellion. When Shah Jahan took seriously ill, these two sensed an opportunity to usurp the throne, so they headed back to Agra. Normally, the practice is that the armies are left a distance behind and the princes travel through to the fort. But this time, they were advancing with their armies, so it became apparent that their designs are on the throne, and so Dara Shukov, at the head of the royal army, decided to take them on. In that battle, the Battle of Samugad, Dara Shikoh lost, not being a great military tactician. He lost, and Aurangzeb moved further, encircled the fortress, and cut off water supply and food for 8 days before his father surrendered. And then Shah Jahan was incarcerated. In the meanwhile, Dara Shikoh with his family fled to the outskirts of the kingdom. And in Kashmir, he took refuge with a governor whom he had once saved from the wrath of his father. But the politics of the time, he was betrayed, and the governor imprisoned him in a cage. And in order to please Aurangzeb, he had the cage pulled and dragged all the way back to Delhi without wheels. Once on arrival, Aurangzeb put Dara Shikoh on a elephant with torn clothes and paraded him in the streets to show to the people that look what I can do to your beloved prince. As it so happens that he then beheads Dara Shikoh and he presents that head to Shah Jahan. Such is the cruelty. In the meanwhile, Murad Baksh, who fought alongside Aurangzeb, he was also tricked into a feast and put to death. His howdah on which he sat, the howdah or the canopy on the elephant, resembled a porcupine with battle spears stuck into it in all directions. Aurangzeb had this howdah displayed in the central hall to show the valor with which Murad Baksh fought, and at the same time a reminder to the other princes as to what he could do in case he incurred his wrath. This is how he took charge of the throne and reigned further. And Aurangzeb's reign continued in this manner where he brought upon great miseries upon the people because of his temperament. And you can see a man who can do this to his father and his brothers, obviously, what will he do to his people? So that continues for a while, and he reigned for a pretty long period. But then this was probably one low point of the civilization, and it was time that the saffron had to rise. And it began with the great Chhatrapati Maharaj, Shivaji Maharaj. And people always try to claim that Shivaji Maharaj had Muslims in his army, etc., etc. It wasn't a fight for Hindutva or a Hindu thing. I agree. He wasn't fighting per se for Hinduism. But what is Hinduism without the culture, the value system, and the heritage? He was fighting for that. He was not against Muslims. His fight was in order to protect and regain the cultural values and the heritage and the value systems of our civilization, the Indic civilization or the Hindu ethos. And for that, if there were native Indians or Muslims, he would take anybody who would subscribe to his viewpoint because he was an inclusive king as per the ethos of our ancient times. We are an inclusive society. So for him, it was this battle of inclusiveness, and he fought against these oppressors who were a very, very divisive lot because the marks of their divisions we can see even today, 400 years later, the outcomes. So that is how Chhatrapati Shivaji came to represent the ethos of Hindutva. And that is why he fought. And then when he fought, he started off almost from nowhere. And when he engaged with Aurangzeb in such a manner that Aurangzeb for 17 years, his last 17 years of his life, he could not get back home. Once he left in order to be able to manage these campaigns because he was very much tormented by Chhatrapati Shivaji. He came out and he could never go back to his home again. And that is how busy he was kept. And now that is a kind of emperor or the so-called emperor of Hindustan, as the modern historians want to claim, that he could not even settle back. And to the extent that even the Shah of Iran wrote him a scathing letter saying that you, who only knows how to imprison your father and snatch the throne from him and kill the rightful heirs of his throne, your own brothers, you know nothing else. The infidels, they are reigning over you, they are giving you a tough time. I think it is time that I come with my army and put them in place. This is how frustrated the emperor in Iran was. So you can imagine what is the state of affairs at that time. This is how, but then of course Shivaji had an untimely death a little earlier than expected, barring which history would have been very, very different. But this is where I call as the rise of the saffron in order to protect the civilization that was facing great strains. At the same time, there was another great son of the land, and that is Guru Gobind Singhji. He had started the Khalsa Panth essentially to create a Kshatriya body that is going to fight these atrocities that were coming from the Mughals. And whether it is Shivaji or Gobind Singhji, I'm not telling you much details because you are aware of it. The issue to be understood here is that how this civilization is trying to safeguard its values and its culture, etc. And in this quest, I mean, some of the greatest sacrifices, I mean, this is very difficult to contain the tears when you hear of these stories which have happened. Like, for example, Guru Gobind Singh, he lost four of his sons. Even before they were barely in their teens, and the youngest one was 9 years old. And two sons of his were bricked alive in a wall. But they did not submit. I mean, what sacrifices or are there any other parallel you can find in the global history of people who stood up for what they believed in terms of the value systems? Those two little boys were so motivated that under great duress they did not submit, and they were bricked alive, children, on the orders of Aurangzeb, executed by a governor of his. He's a Muslim, and of course supported by a diwan of that governor who's a Hindu. Apart from this, Guru Gobind Singh Ji also lost two other sons in battle, and he put up such a stiff resistance, and the sacrifices that came before him and the sacrifices that followed after him by the Sikhs and the great sons of this land are just heart-rending stories. I'm not going to take each of those, but then yes, we will touch upon them just to highlight the great sacrifices that our ancestors did in order to be able to defend in what we believe in. And these should never be forgotten by people. Now, for the second story. The general impression given to us is that the Mughals were ruling over the entire country, and that's false. There were many kingdoms that were still free, and if some of those kingdoms had Muslim rulers and they were beginning to get native in culture, the Mughals would not like them. One such kingdom was the Deccan, which was ruled by the Qutub Shahi dynasty. The Qutub Shahi rulers were following closely the Persian culture, and religiously their affinity was with Shia. Some of their kings had paid tributes to the Mughals, but then the last two kings had stopped paying tribute to Aurangzeb. The last king in particular, popularly known as Tana Shah, is Abul Hassan Qutub Shah. He had taken very much to the local ethos and had a lot of Hindu officials in his kingdom, etc., which was not liked by Aurangzeb. And he then attacked his kingdom and his fort at Golconda, which is very close to Hyderabad. Aurangzeb laid siege for 8 months, and when he failed to penetrate, they were almost on the verge of giving up and returning. At that time, a Muslim general of Tana Shah by name Mahabbat Khan defected. And in 1687, in the early morning hours, at around 3 a.m. one morning, the Mughal forces stormed the fortress. One of the gates was left open by this defected general, and the Qutub Shahi forces were taken by surprise. They fought fiercely, but by 7:30 a.m. it was all over. Once this news was given to Tana Shah, he went across to the ladies' chambers and broke the news to them. They began wailing and beating their chest in fear and anxiety. He moved on further, and when the Mughal commander wanted to have an audience with the ruler, he was brought in his presence. And to the surprise of the Mughal commander, he saw Tana Shah sitting in his fine silks, enjoying a 40-course breakfast. He couldn't contain himself and he asked him, "Even in this situation, you have such an appetite?" And Tana Shah's reply was epic. He said, "My family was pushing carts. What I have today is by the grace of the Almighty. If today He has decided to take it all away, why should I lament? Come, son, join me. You must be hungry." He was, however, arrested and taken away. But this news reached Aurangzeb, who, for once, was impressed, and instead of having him beheaded, decided to have him imprisoned. Tana Shah gave up all his belongings along the way, including his expensive pearl necklaces. He handed over to the gateman, and later on, 12 years later, he died in the dungeons. And Mahabad Khan was made the governor, and they later on went on to become the Nizams of the Hyderabad state. My friends, thanks a lot for listening to me. We will meet and talk about further stories in the next episode.